I hate introductions, don't you? But it seems like they're always necessary. So here goes. I'm Ashley. I'm a wife, mom, pastor, and missionary's kid, which is double trouble if you didn't know. And if you're in this space, we're here to learn about who God is, who we are in Him, and how to do faith in the real, meaning the real messy. Hey, it's time to grab your favorite beverage, coffee, whatever you enjoy, and get comfortable because this is episode 12, Chats with Ash, and I'm so glad you're here. Today, we are going to be talking about facing scary unknowns. Do you have any that you've faced or maybe that you are facing? Take a moment and think about that story that you have. And think about some things that you learned from it. And while you're doing that, push that subscribe button so that you can get the content as it's coming out in the following weeks and stay up to date. I have a story for you today about one of the scariest unknowns that I have faced to date. And it was probably particularly frightening for me because it involved one of our children. I don't think there's any way to prepare a person for how scary it is to watch your child walk through hard things. Because you're faced with this really unsettling reality check that you're not in control and you can't always fix it. And it's very unsettling. This story happened at least 4 or 5 years ago now. It was shortly after we moved to Michigan. Our oldest was 7 or 8 at the time. He woke up one summer morning. It was a Sunday. We all got dressed. Everything was fine. We went to church. We came back and we ate lunch. And that afternoon, he was laying on the couch. He watched a little show. And by the time it was finished, he was feeling bad. And he went from perfectly fine and normal to not being able to walk across our living room. It was like all of his energy left him, and he would tell us he didn't feel good, but he couldn't really articulate what was wrong. It was like, does your throat hurt? Does your stomach hurt? I just don't feel good, he would say. And so I assumed, okay, he's got some sort of virus that will run its course and he'll be fine in a day or two. But days passed and he was so weak and he was so lethargic. And that was like the only symptom that I could see. We have a 2-story house and he was like, we have video still of him trying to crawl up the stairs because he couldn't walk up the stairs normally. It was really bizarre. So we gave it a few days and called the doctor. And they said, it's probably some sort of virus. Are there any other symptoms, fever, anything like that? No. So we gave it a few more days. And when it didn't clear up, we called the doctor again and scheduled an appointment. And that started an 8-week road with the doctor of trying to figure out what in the world was going on with our kid. We were still really new here. We had landed in a church, but all of the relationships were brand new, and our families were 6 hours away plus. So Eric, he was in this brand new job. It's not like he could just take a ton of time off. And I had our oldest and 2 younger children, the youngest being 3 or 4. And I remember several doctor's appointments being made, several tests being run, several possible diagnoses put on the table, one of them being cancer. And it was terrifying. I would, to get him to appointments, I would put our oldest in our little umbrella stroller because he didn't have the energy to walk. I mean, it wasn't like he couldn't walk at all, but it was like to walk from the car in the parking lot to the inside of the doctor's office, he couldn't make it. And yet I had these 2 other little ones. So I would make them walk and push the older one into the appointments. And we did several of those appointments. The only thing that the doctors could see as a potential problem, because all of the blood work was coming back normal, was his tonsils were huge. He inherited his daddy's tonsils. Ever since he was really little, every time a doctor looked into his mouth, they would say, "Oh, what big tonsils you have." I mean, they were pretty significant. And so they did appear red, perhaps agitated, but he had no trouble swallowing or eating. I mean, he wasn't complaining of any pain, but that was the only thing that they could see that was possibly not okay. So they put him on a round of steroids to see if that would help reduce inflammation. I can't remember the exact timetable of this off the top of my head, but I know there was one night he was very uncomfortable. It was like 11 at night, and I told Eric, I said, I think he needs to go to the ER. I don't know what else to do. It was a weekend. And so I loaded him up. Eric stayed home with the other two. And this was part of the challenge of, I don't know this area. I don't even know how to get to this hospital. I don't know what the area around the hospital's like. It's really late at night. But I'm the one that's been taking him to all the doctor's appointments. I've been hearing the information firsthand, so I probably need to be the one to take him to the ER. So that's what happened. Took him to the ER. There wasn't really anything they could do. They had the same comments about the tonsils. We went home. Long story short, he ended up going through, I believe it was two rounds of tonsils. Not tonsils, 2 rounds of steroids. And finally, the doctor said, let's get an ENT involved and see what he thinks, because I don't know what else to do. The ENT suggested that he have a tonsillectomy and see if that helped him feel better. During this time of trying to find answers in what was going on in our son's body, our pastor at church was going through Ephesians. He was talking about the different pieces of armor that we as believers have to combat the attacks of Satan. I was consumed with worry and fear for our son. One night I was laying in bed. I was having a really hard time going to sleep because I was so worried. I had just recently heard the word cancer come out of the doctor's mouth. Eric was asleep, the kids were asleep, and I laid there in the dark and just felt this oppressiveness that I can't really articulate. I don't know. I haven't ever had a panic attack, but I don't know if I was headed that direction or not, but I felt like there was something on my chest. It was very hard to breathe, and this panic was welling up inside of me. Our pastor had just talked about calling out to God when fiery darts are being thrown your way. And literally the only thing that I could get out mentally was, God, help. And immediately, the darkness fled. I don't know how else to say it. The weight lifted, and this sense of peace came over me. And I started repeating and praying scripture that I could bring to mind, trying to redirect my thoughts to what is true and to who is true. And I fell asleep. And that night changed the course of my direction as his mom, walking through that season with him. It was still really hard and it was still really scary, but I had this assurance of presence that our God was there and with us. On his second round of steroids, he started perking up quite a bit and he started playing and being more active, and we were really excited to see that. We had scheduled the surgery to have his tonsils removed. We were, about 4 or 5 days out of the surgery, and we were invited to a group event at someone's home. And they live in the country. They have a wonderful area in their backyard for playing. So all the kids were out there playing and we were watching him and just so happy to see him looking normal again. And we went back home and I put him in bed and I checked on him, and he had fallen asleep and he didn't have a shirt on. It was summer. And he was very thin. He's always been thin, but he had lost a lot of weight during that time. And I could see his chest, it was like caving in as he was struggling to catch a breath. So I called our ENT. This was like, we'll say it was a Saturday night. And I told him what was going on. And he said, I am going to call ahead to the hospital. You need to get him to the hospital ASAP. They are going to have a room ready and waiting for you. So I'm a very emotional person. You guys know this if you've been listening to me. And I've done pretty well holding it together. It's like a miraculous thing here because I'm not blubbering like a baby. But I remember kind of going into this go mode. And so I told Eric, I was like, Eric, I need you to call my parents, because as soon as I hear my mom or dad's voice, I know I'm going to lose it, and I can't lose it right now. And threw things in a bag, grabbed our son, hopped in the car, and went straight to the hospital where they were waiting for us. They hooked him up to IVs. They put more steroids in him. He was so swollen. His tonsils were at that point that he was having a hard time to breathe. And they scheduled an emergency tonsillectomy, which the ENT was like, in all my 20 plus years of practice, I have never had to do an emergency surgery like this. But my parents, as soon as they received the call, they hopped in the car and started the 6-hour drive in the middle of the night to get to us. And I stayed in the hospital that night with our son. This is what I get for saying I was holding it together. All right. I am very grateful for my parents and their presence. And I also failed to mention the first time that we went to the ER. I had texted some friends from church and just said, hey, would you guys pray for us? We're at the ER. And this couple that we barely knew showed up and sat with us in the ER. They brought our son a slushie. So very grateful for these relationships, for the people that were praying for us, for the people that were providing physical presence for us, because it was a very frightening time. He had the surgery, and lo and behold, it was like the cure. He started improving. He slowly started gaining his energy back. He started eating again, and he got better. Here's the really cool part about that. Since our son was very young, he had seemed to have a very clear understanding of the gospel, the good news. We had talked from a very early age about how we are born with black hearts. We're full of sin, and we can try to be good, but we need God. We need God to give us new hearts. And he would say, I understand that my heart is full of sin and that I need rescued, but I'm really not ready for that. And we would just say, thank you for being honest with us, and we're going to keep praying for you. Shortly after his surgery, one afternoon he came downstairs to the living room where we were, and he said, Dad, Mom, God must really love me. because I didn't want him to rescue me. But he made me better anyway. And we said, yeah, he really does love you. And he said, well, I'm ready to be rescued now. To this day, the doctors cannot tell us exactly what was going on in his body. The best they can offer is that he must have had some sort of virus that rested in his tonsils. And that's the extent of the explanation that we were given. When I look back at that time, I think, if for no other reason than to help our son understand how much he is loved and to soften his heart, then perhaps that is why God allowed him and us to walk through it. And I'm so grateful for that. But we all face scary unknowns in life. Some of your stories might be a lot more difficult than what I shared and a lot more scary than what I shared. And I wanted to touch on the story of that night in the dark and feeling that oppression and feeling that fear and being overwhelmed and calling out to God and experiencing his immediate presence with you, to remind you that our God doesn't just see us. He isn't just aware of us, not that we deserve either of those, but he is actively involved in our lives. He is in control of every step of the way. I wish I could say that because of his active presence and control in our lives that everything is going to be easy, but we all know that's not how it works, because we live in a fallen world. We live in a world full of sin. Some of you might understandably say, well, if God is so good, then why would he allow these things to happen? That's a great question. And I would encourage you to own it if that's where you're at. But I'd also encourage you to seek him. Because there's a verse in the Bible, and you may have heard it before, and it talks about how God works all things together for good to those that love him. And he also uses those things to make us more like him. There are a lot of evil things in the world. And God has given us free will. And I wish a lot of the evil things didn't exist. And I wish that there were things that we experience as believers that we didn't have to experience. But I know that when we love him, when we are in active relationship with him, none of that is wasted. All of that he promises and will and does use for our good. And it requires trust. And that can be really difficult. I get that. I mean, some of you have experienced far more hardship than I can even imagine. And I can give you an answer, but honestly, you need to go to the one who is the answer and wrestle that through with him and open his word and investigate it and let him speak to you and let him work through whatever means he's going to work through to reveal himself to you. I love that the scriptures say, when you seek me, you will find me if you seek me with all of your heart, and he will reveal himself to you. But I want to encourage you, if you're facing scary unknowns, to call out to God. Call out to God using scripture. It's really powerful. And call out to him with the expectancy that he will respond. And also, don't walk through those times alone. That time was extremely scary for us. But the people that came alongside of us, the people that rallied around us, the people that were praying for us and encouraging us, man, it would have been so much more frightening without them. And so if you're going through that, reach out. If you know somebody that's going through a time, reach out. And don't just say, what can I do? Because a lot of times you don't know how to answer that question. So just do. Send them a gift card for a restaurant. Send them a gas card. Send them a note in the mail just saying, hey, I love you. I'm praying for you. Mow their lawn. Just do it. And that's the best way to support. If you're going through a hard time, I want to be here for you. So feel free to reach out. I would be happy to pray for you. Our God knows your needs. He sees you, He cares, and He's given us each other. And let's close this episode by the reminder that when we're willing to admit we need Him, that's when we start making our stories all about Him. And aren't you glad that He can take any story and work it for good? I sure am. I'll see you next time.